Edward leaned back in his leather chair, savoring the view from his high-rise corner office. The glow of success was almost tangible, filling him with quiet pride. He had risen through the ranks faster than anyone else at his firm and had earned a reputation as one of the city's most talented attorneys. Every long night, every sacrifice had felt justified, and nothing, no one would weigh him down. Not even Emma. Her name sparked a faint flicker of discomfort, which he quickly suppressed. She had been his first real relationship, but she hadn't fit into his vision for the future. Emma was warm-hearted, creative, and genuine, but she lacked the ambition he prized. When the bills piled up and her part-time job no longer paid the bills, Edward had gently urged her to find something more stable. But Emma resisted, insisting she needed more time to figure things out. To Edward, time was a luxury he couldn't afford to waste. So he made the decision swiftly, with the cool detachment he had become known for. "Emma," he had said one evening, "we want different things. I can't stay tied to someone who isn't going anywhere." Her reaction caught him off guard. She didn't beg, didn't protest. Instead, she stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief, her wounded pride slowly surfacing. Without a word, she left, only a slight tremble in her voice as she said goodbye. He watched her go, certain she'd bounce back. After all, someone like Emma could handle anything. But that was the last time he saw her. In the years that followed, Edward barely thought of her. His career accelerated, filled with prestigious clients, networking events, and an ever-growing reputation. Emma, and whatever happened to her, had been buried in his past. But as is often the case, the past has a way of resurrecting itself, often in the most unexpected ways. Years later, Edward's firm received an invitation from an organization called Voices of Resilience, a non-profit dedicated to empowering single mothers who had overcome homelessness. They were seeking corporate sponsors to support job training programs, housing assistance, and childcare resources. Edward's boss was eager to partner with them, seeing it as a perfect opportunity to improve the firm's public image and showcase their commitment to corporate responsibility. Edward was tasked with attending the upcoming media event. The day of the event arrived and Edward, as always, dressed sharply. He expected a routine evening of mingling and exchanging polite smiles, where his only task would be to pose for a few photos and shake hands with influential figures. But as he entered the venue, something felt different. This wasn't just another event filled with polished executives. The room was filled with women whose faces told stories of struggle, resilience, and strength. Edward felt a flicker of discomfort he couldn't quite place. As he moved through the crowd, his gaze landed on the stage, where a woman was being introduced as the keynote speaker. She was described with an air of reverence, someone who had inspired countless women to rebuild their lives. Edward glanced up, mildly curious. Then he froze. It had to be her. Time had softened her features, but it hadn't dimmed her spirit. There she stood, with the same quiet strength he remembered, yet now she radiated a confidence he'd never seen before. She was stunning, poised in a way that left him speechless. A hush fell over the crowd as she began to speak. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Years ago, I found myself alone, with no one to turn to and nowhere to go. I'd lost my job, and I had no family nearby. I was homeless, living day by day, struggling just to survive." Her voice quivered slightly, but the strength behind it was undeniable. Her eyes swept across the room, and Edward's pulse quickened, a gnawing sensation rising in his chest. Was she talking about him? Emma's words carried a weight of both pain and pride. "I had to rebuild my life from nothing, and I did it, not just for myself, but for my daughter. She became my strength, my reason to keep going." Her eyes flashed with intensity as she added, "No woman should ever be abandoned or discarded just because her circumstances aren't perfect." The audience hung on her every word, moved by her raw vulnerability. Edward felt his hands grow clammy, a cold shock spreading through him. "Daughter, the word echoed in his mind. He tried to make sense of it. Could she be talking about his daughter? Emma continued, speaking of the hardships she had faced and the resilience it took to overcome them. She shared stories of cold nights, empty pockets, and rejection, but she had pushed through it all, driven by the unbreakable bond she shared with the child she carried. Her voice rose, gaining momentum, her passion igniting a fire in every woman in the room. I stand here today not just as an advocate, but as proof that resilience can arise from the darkest places. And my daughter, she is my greatest pride, the one who reminded me every single day that I was worth more than the struggles life threw at me. Edward's thoughts were reeling. His daughter asterisk, he was gripped by the memory of their last night together, now tainted by guilt and regret. He hadn't known. Had she reached out to him? Had she thought he had abandoned her, even with a child on the way? Emma paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. Today, I want to remind everyone, especially those in a position to make a difference, that we have a choice. We can lift others up, or we can watch them struggle. I hope this organization serves as a reminder for all of us to stand up for women in need, and most importantly, never turn our backs on them. As applause filled the room, Edward felt a knot twist in his stomach. Emma stepped down from the stage, her presence electrifying the air around her, while he stood frozen, rooted to the spot. Years of building his reputation, climbing to the top, none of it mattered now. All the power, the respect, it slipped through his fingers like sand. An overwhelming urgency surged within him. He needed to confront her, to see the daughter he never knew existed. He needed to understand if he had truly destroyed any chance for reconciliation, or if there was still hope to mend what he had carelessly broken. As Emma descended the steps, she caught his eye from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but in that moment, Edward knew his life would never be the same. The room buzzed with admiration as Emma left the stage, surrounded by women and men eager to shake her hand, congratulate her, and tell her how much her story had moved them. Edward remained at a distance, his mind racing, his body immobilized. He felt a wave of paralysis, a crushing mix of guilt, disbelief, and the undeniable realization that his world was beginning to unravel. He wanted to approach her, to say something, anything, but what could he possibly say? She had been left homeless, abandoned, raising a child he hadn't even known existed. Any words he spoke now would only highlight his failure. Yet, standing there, doing nothing, felt even worse. Before he could decide on his next move, a woman from the organization approached him, eager to discuss potential sponsorships and media coverage. Edward forced himself to nod and smile, engaging in polite conversation, but his mind kept drifting back to Emma. She was radiant, surrounded by people who saw her as a hero, a symbol of resilience. And deservedly so. She had become everything he had failed to see in her all those years ago. Ambitious, passionate, unwavering. She was everything he'd once believed she wasn't. Finally, as the crowd around her began to thin, Edward summoned the courage to approach her. She saw him before he could say a word, her expression a blend of surprise and guarded defiance. "Edward," she said flatly, her voice betraying nothing. "Emma," he responded, his voice betraying the tremor he couldn't hide. "I didn't know you were involved with this organization." Emma raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. "Why would you?" She replied coolly, "It's not like we've stayed in touch." He swallowed, his throat tight. "Emma, he hesitated, unsure how to put the weight of his thoughts into words. "I didn't know about her, our daughter." Emma's expression didn't shift, her eyes searching his face for any sign of authenticity. "Would it have made a difference if you had known?" Her question cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth to answer but realized he didn't know the answer. The man he had been back then had been so fixated on climbing the ladder, on building a life for himself, that he hadn't considered anyone else's needs, least of all Emma's. "I don't know," he admitted softly, almost whispering. "But I want to know her now. I want to make things right." Emma's gaze turned hard. "You can't just show up and expect everything to be fixed, Edward. You can't erase years of abandonment with a few words." A sharp pang of shame twisted in his chest. He had been naive to think a simple apology could heal the wound he had inflicted. He searched for words that might express his regret, his sorrow, but they felt hollow in the face of her pain. Can I at least meet her?" he asked, his voice thick with a mixture of hope and fear. Emma crossed her arms, her posture cold and defensive. "You don't get to waltz in and disrupt her life, Edward. She's grown up with the knowledge that her father didn't want her. How do you think she'll react if you suddenly show up now?" The weight of Emma's words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had always seen himself as a man of integrity, someone who handled things with responsibility and respect. Yet standing there, facing the full magnitude of his failure, he realized how deeply he had hurt her and his daughter. "Please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just tell me about her. Let me understand what I missed." For a fleeting moment, Emma's expression softened, a glimmer of empathy cutting through her usual guardedness. She took a steadying breath, torn between anger and a quiet pity. "Her name is Lily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a quiet pride. "She's bright, curious, strong-willed, everything I ever hoped she'd be." Lily. The name felt unfamiliar on his tongue, yet it stirred something deep within him, an ache he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. He closed his eyes for a brief second, imagining a little girl with Emma's eyes, perhaps his own stubbornness. A child who had grown up without his love, without his support. "Thank you," he said, his words hollow but genuine, "for raising her, for shaping her into the person she is, everything I couldn't be." Emma studied him carefully, her eyes searching for any sign of remorse, any indication that he understood the weight of his past actions. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, her voice tinged with both pride and bitterness. "I did it because she deserved a life of dignity, a life where she wouldn't feel like a burden." Edward's guilt swelled within him, a sharp stab of remorse. The truth of her words hit harder than he expected. He had dismissed Emma as a distraction, someone who didn't fit into his ambitions. But in doing so, he had abandoned his own child, leaving her to grow up without a father's love. "Emma, please," he said, his voice barely steady. "Let me be a part of her life. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try. I want to make it right." A flicker of pain crossed Emma's face, quickly masked by a coldness that seemed to settle over her like a protective shield. She turned her gaze away, lost in a memory he could never reach. After a long silence, she spoke, her tone flat, resigned. "Lily knows about you, Edward. She knows you're the man who walked away. The one who left her before she was even born. She knows enough." The finality in her words knocked the breath from his chest. He had always believed in second chances, that people could change and make amends. But now, faced with the undeniable truth, he realized some wounds ran too deep. Some bridges were beyond repair. Emma sighed softly, her expression softening just a fraction. "Look," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "I don't want to deny her the chance to know you. But that's her decision to make, not mine. You can't force your way into her life just because you suddenly feel regret. If she wants to meet you, I'll let her decide." Edward nodded, his throat tight. It was more than he deserved, but somehow it felt like the only thing he could ask for. "Thank you," he murmured, the words carrying a weight of gratitude and sorrow. At that moment, a young girl approached Emma, her face lighting up as she reached for her hand. Edward's heart skipped a beat. She was about 11, with bright, intelligent eyes and a shy yet curious smile. There was something about her, something that stirred a deep, unfamiliar feeling inside him. Perhaps it was the way she resembled Emma, or the way she looked at him with innocent curiosity. "Lily," Emma said softly, her voice warm with tenderness. "This is Edward, a friend of mine." Lily's gaze shifted toward him, her expression tentative yet intrigued. "Hello," she said softly, offering him a small, cautious smile. Edward's chest tightened as a flood of emotions overtook him, joy, sorrow, and a deep ache. This was his daughter, the child he had never known, the person he had missed all these years. He had abandoned her before she'd even taken her first breath. He forced a smile, fighting to keep his emotions in check. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lily studied him for a moment, then turned back to Emma, her eyes filled with admiration. "Mom, can we go get some ice cream now?" she asked eagerly. Emma smiled, her face softening as she nodded. "Of course, sweetheart." Edward watched them walk away, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. For years, he had built a life filled with success, status, and respect. Yet in this moment, all of that seemed meaningless. He had wealth, influence, and power, but the one thing he truly craved, a connection with his own child, was still out of reach. As they disappeared into the crowd, Edward felt a surge of determination. He couldn't change the past, but maybe he could still build a future where Lily would one day accept him. It wouldn't be easy, and Emma's trust wouldn't come easily either, but for the first time in years, Edward felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild the bridge he had so recklessly burned. The weeks that followed were a blur of new emotions for Edward. He immersed himself in understanding single-parent families and the unique challenges they faced, particularly single mothers like Emma. He started volunteering at Voices of Resilience *, not just to support the organization, but also to better understand the life Emma had built without him. It was humbling work, and it quickly became clear how much he had taken his own privileges for granted. Seeing women who had, like Emma, survived hardship, poverty, and homelessness to give their children a better future stirred something deep inside him. Through his volunteer work, Edward crossed paths with Emma again. She remained guarded, still wary of his intentions, but she couldn't ignore his persistence. His actions spoke louder than words. He didn't push to see Lily or demand Emma's forgiveness. Instead, he quietly worked alongside her, respecting her space, proving through his efforts that he was willing to change. One afternoon, as they finished sorting donated clothes, Emma finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this, Edward?" she asked, her tone neutral, neither accusing nor forgiving. It was a simple, honest question. Edward paused, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. His hands hovered over the pile of clothes. "Because I want to be someone Lily can be proud of," he answered, meeting her gaze. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want her to see that people can change. I can change." Emma studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. A trace of vulnerability flickered through her otherwise guarded demeanor. She seemed to be weighing his words, searching his face for any hint of deceit. "People don't change overnight," she said quietly. "It takes time and commitment." "I know," he replied earnestly, "and I'm willing to put in that time for her and for you." Emma's expression softened, though she didn't respond. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the unspoken possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was sincere. One evening, as Edward was wrapping up some work at the office, he received a text from Emma. His heart skipped a beat as he read the simple yet profound message. Lily wants to meet you tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. at the park by our house *. A rush of emotions flooded through him, excitement, fear, and an overwhelming sense of joy. He hardly slept that night, his mind racing with what he might say, and wondering if Lily would even like him. By morning, he was a bundle of nerves, but he was determined to make this meeting everything it needed to be. The next day, he arrived at the park early, dressed casually to avoid intimidating her. As he spotted Emma and Lily near the swings, his heart clenched. They were laughing together, the warmth between them almost palpable. Emma's smile was the same smile he remembered from years ago, one he had longed to see again. Lily noticed him first. She studied him with cautious curiosity, but gaze both wary and inquisitive. Emma gave her a gentle nudge, urging her to take a few steps toward him. Hesitant at first, Lily slowly approached. "Hi, Lily," Edward greeted softly, his voice trembling slightly. "It's nice to finally meet you." She tilted her head, her eyes studying him closely, and for a moment, he could see Emma reflected in her gaze. "Are you really my dad?" Lily asked, her voice a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. She asked, her voice a blend of wonder and uncertainty. Edward swallowed hard, kneeling down to her level. "Yes, I am. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before, but I want to be here now if you'll let me." Lily glanced back at Emma, who gave her a quiet, encouraging nod. Slowly, Lily turned back to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Mom says you're really smart," she said, a teasing challenge in her tone. Edward couldn't help but chuckle, warmth flooding him. "Well, I like to think so, but I think you might be even smarter." She giggled, and the sound filled him with a joy he'd never known. They spent the afternoon together, talking and playing on the swings, while Emma observed from a distance, her face unreadable. As the sun began to dip, Lily ran back to Emma, leaving Edward standing there with a deep sense of gratitude and hope. Emma approached him, arms crossed, but her expression was softer than he'd ever seen. "She likes you," Emma said quietly, a hint of reluctance in her voice. Edward let out a breath, relief washing over him. "I'm glad. Thank you for giving me this chance, Emma. I know I don't deserve it." Emma studied him for a long moment, as if finally seeing the man he had become. "I didn't do it for you, Edward," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I did it for her. She deserves to know where she comes from, and she deserves the chance to have you in her life, if she chooses to." He nodded, humbled by her words. "I understand. And I just want you to know that I'll never walk away again from either of you." Emma's expression softened, something like forgiveness flickering in her eyes. She gave him a brief nod before calling Lily over. As the two of them walked away together, Edward felt a quiet peace settle over him. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to face it. He understood now what it truly meant to be a father and a man, and he was determined to live up to that responsibility, one step at a time. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them with us in the comments.